generating reliable real-world evidence to meaningfully impact decision-making, the best strategy for OHDSI network studies is to get as many databases as possible rather than getting enough to answer the question quickly. In debate number 2, yes, I need you to vote. So we're going to vote on this specific question, and I'm going to activate it. So right now, if you go to pollev.com/PatrickRyan800, you should be able to now see a debate. If you are in support of the assertion that OHDSI network studies should try to get as many databases as possible, I want you to vote yes. Affirmative, I agree. If you think that the right strategy for OHDSI is just to get enough databases to answer the question quickly, I want you to answer no. Negative, I don't agree. And if you're not sure about this question yet, if you're not sure whether the best is to get more data or to get fewer, then you can answer I don't know. We're going to hear from a debate, and we're going to make those of you who are on the fence listen to our debaters and ultimately make a choice as it relates to these options. I'm going to give you 30 seconds here to vote. All right. There's a bunch of people on the fence. About a quarter of you aren't quite sure. Looks like about a third of you are feeling like having more databases is better, and about 40% of you are feeling like we're doing fewer quicker might be a better strategy. All right, so that's where we are starting with. Our debaters today, arguing for the affirmative is Erica Voss, so she will be arguing for why there's value in getting as many databases as possible. And arguing to the negative will be Ed Byrne, who will be arguing for getting enough just to answer the question quickly. Same rules as before. Erica, you'll get to go first, and you have 5 minutes starting now.
Okay, so I'm going to argue that when you're doing a study, more data is better. And aside from it being an excuse to hang out with my friends at the different data partners, I do think there are some benefits when you can get more data. So I would like to highlight that I think more data allows you the opportunity to show consistency. It also allows you the opportunity to highlight and uncover heterogeneity. And finally, it also gives you the opportunity to data capture when there might not be a lot of data to be had. So I'll start with consistency. And so when I'm thinking about consistency, if I ask a question across a set of databases and I'm getting similar answers, I actually feel better about the answer that I'm getting. I'm seeing it consistently across data sets. And so an example of consistency would be our LEGEND hypertension study. And this was a work led by Martijn Schumi, where we were trying to produce evidence at scale. And specifically in that study, we looked at different hypertension therapies and we were going to compare them to each other for certain outcomes. There were 55 outcomes, things like AMI, hospitalization with heart failure, and stroke. But we did that over 9 different databases. There were 6 administrative claims databases, 3 EHRs, and it was across 4 different countries. In total, there were 6 million estimates produced. But a really important finding from this study was that even though we looked across all these different databases, we did see a high degree of consistency between the databases of certain questions that were being asked. So in this case, that consistency made us feel better about the answer that we were pulling back from the data. Next, I'd like to talk about heterogeneity and uncovering that within data. And when I'm thinking about heterogeneity is actually being able to see maybe differences in population or even differences in data captured. So for heterogeneity, I think of things like George Ripsack's treatment pathway study. And in that paper, he thought about different common diseases and looking at the treatments that were experienced after. So, for example, in type 2 diabetes, we want to understand what's the first, second, and third medications that patients kind of go through as they're being treated for their type 2 diabetes. Now, the whole, what George learned was if we look across different databases, and in that paper, they looked at 11 different databases, 4 different countries, and again, a mix of EHR and claims data. And at a whole, what they learned was for type 2 diabetes, we did see about 75% of the time metformin was the first drug of choice. And that makes sense because that's usually what's being recommended for an initial diagnosis. But what's interesting in this paper is they actually did that same analysis at the individual database levels. And what they learned when looking at JMDC, which is a Japanese claims database, is that that first initial drug was a little bit different in Japan. So instead of 75% of the time being metformin, it was more like 25% of the time was were patients getting metformin as the first drug. And so what they had done in that study is uncovered heterogeneity. And they were able to then think, well, why are we seeing that? And I think in the paper they discussed that there might be a little bit of a lag of the adoption of metformin. Finally, I'd like to highlight, I think it gives you the opportunity for data capture. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my study with COVID and ASIs, where we looked at adverse events of special interest after a COVID-19 diagnosis. And one of the ASIs was narcolepsy, which I thought was a pretty simple, you're going to see it everywhere type of diagnosis. But in that study, we had 26 different databases. Two of the databases literally could not even look at the phenotype. Either they knew that they did not have data capture for that, or the definition didn't work for them. 11 of the databases just had no people with narcolepsy at all. 6 of the databases had some patients, but the numbers were so small they were censored. So, of the 26 databases, I only had 7 databases that had some narcolepsy in it. So, in that case, I felt that if maybe we hadn't gone as broad as we did, we may not have even generated any evidence for narcolepsy. So, I highlighted more data allows you the opportunity to see consistency, uncover heterogeneity, and the ability to grab data capture. So, Ed, what do you think?
Ooh, very good. Thank you, Erica. Ed, you're going to be arguing for getting enough to answer the question quickly. You've got 5 minutes as soon as you come off of mute.
Yes, thanks, Erica.
All right.
Can I start? Yeah. So that was very informative, and I think you actually explained very well one of the reasons I was going to give why we should use few databases and kind of prioritize appropriate databases. So I think narcolepsy is a very interesting example, right? You started with this large potential pool of databases, and you ended up running this analysis in just a few, because just a few were appropriate for that research question. So I think that's a very beneficial point on this as a side of thinking. And I think this is the point, right? All the studies start with a research question. So every kind of clinical study we're doing start with a research question, and we're trying to find the sufficient number of databases to help us answer that research question. In many occasions, I would say that's a relatively small subset of the whole OHDSI network. And trying to add lots of databases leaves you in the position of having many databases that aren't producing results for your specific outcome of interest. And so I think the benefit of that case might have been to start earlier with fewer that would have contributed to that analysis, for example. And I think, so this is the first point, was just about finding databases that were appropriate. And I think another point that's probably slightly underappreciated is even when we have multiple databases in the network that can appropriately answer a research question, sometimes the methods might depend on the type of data being used. And trying to run the same study on all of them might lead you to kind of simplifications where it would have been better to analyze those databases separately. So for example, if you take something like observation end dates, how are those calculated in different databases? So maybe a hospital database, people are leaving the data as they leave hospital, whereas you have long follow-up in other databases with non-informative censoring. So potentially some survival methods might be appropriate for one, but not the other. And if we try and put those all into the same study with the same methods, you could end up with I would say, lower methodological rigor, because you're trying to run the same analysis in many places. And I think like the main point is just we've heard a lot about marginal benefits of adding more databases, but there's the other side of things, which is a marginal cost. So on the one hand, there might be a financial cost in adding another database, but normally it's about time. So having more databases might reduce uncertainty in your estimate by some small amount as you add more and more, but you have this increasing marginal cost in terms of communication overheads once you've got many different people involved. And this time addition is can be extremely costly depending on the study of interest. And the other kind of time cost is also just about how do you summarize the results from many, many databases from many, many different regions. I think that's a problem we often have. If you've got 100 databases in your study, how do you adequately summarize the limitations and strengths for each of those? So I think what I'd argue for is many smaller studies, but done reproducibly, so people can repeat them. And in the end, people can meta-analyze results from many databases, but on a study-by-study basis that's run on a small subset that give the answer to the research question as quickly as possible. That's me.
All right. Thank you, Ed. All right, Erica, you get a 2-minute response to Ed.
Okay, so Ed, you brought up a lot of great points, so I have to think critically about how to rebut to them. So the first thing is you said essentially you said there may be a select few databases that will allow us to get to the answer that we want. So you gave the example of the narcolepsy. But what I would argue there is, how do we know which of those databases are which? I would not have said a priori that of my 26 databases, only 7 were going to hit on narcolepsy. And I think what's good is we have a lot of tools at our disposal now that are helping us kind of dig into that. So, for example, things like cohort diagnostics provide us quick ways to look at data to get an understanding of where we might get wins. So why not just cast a wide net? You also brought up the idea of time. So yes, doing studies does take time. However, what I would like and challenge people to think about is the actual generation of evidence is not typically where we're spending the time. Our tools are good, our tools are efficient, and we're getting better at delivering packages to individuals so that they can run them on their own individual databases. And oftentimes, when people go to run those packages, they're taking hours, maybe days, in a worst case, maybe a week, but we're generating evidence quickly. What we do need to think about is, from like a project management perspective, how do we organize people together and how do we go through governance quickly? But what I would argue is those are solvable problems. And what we need to do is keep hitting at them to know, where are the project management issues that we can address? Where are the governance issues that we can address and tackle them?
Very good. Thank you, Erica. Ed, 2 minutes to respond.
Yes, so I think it does come down to, like, one of the biggest costs is project management, and we have kind of 2 alternatives. One is getting academics like me to be better at project management, which is quite the lift, I would say. Or the other is being more flexible and drawing in evidence from multiple sources, kind of independently, but then bringing it together, whether through meta-analysis or different approaches. And I think that the latter would also have many benefits for the community as a whole, because I think if you're a new member joining now and you have this opportunity to do research, right, within the OHDSI network, the idea of running like this huge network study is pretty intimidating, and I think it's very hard to become a member of the research community in OHDSI if that's kind of the focus of the research. Whereas if the primary focus is getting many studies done, it's easy to see how a PhD student at one institution can work with another PhD student at another to create a study, where they don't have to become an expert in project management and have this high overhead cost of bringing people together as much as the data.
Very good. All right, so we've got some questions in the chat. I'm going to take the prerogative to select one for each of you. Erica, could you talk, you've got a minute each for these responses. Erica, could you talk about how do you know enough is enough when reviewing databases? If your argument is as much as possible, presumably there's some point where there's diminishing returns, as Ed was arguing. So how should we think about when is enough enough?
Yeah, so at least in my experience with the COVID ASI, I at least started by casting the widest net possible. So we landed with 26 databases, but we started with 40. And so then once we casted a net, we did start to do some analysis of which data sets are actually going to be applicable. So we did use cohort diagnostics to allow us know where we were even going to be able to look at ASIs. But I will say you need to get to a point where you say, okay, I've got enough. I have data. I'm generating evidence. And now we did experience some data partners had, either just like some server issues or things where they were not able to generate evidence. And at one point we had to just say, okay, as of this date, we're done and we're moving forward. So I say cast a wide net as possible and see what you get.
Very good. Thank you, Erica. And Ed, several of the comments in the chat have basically argued that you were making an argument for fit for purpose, but fit for purpose is applicable whether or not you've got one database or 100 databases. So maybe to follow up on that question, Eric, about enough is enough, you've got several examples where you said just one PhD student, another, just two databases. So how could you defend doing a study with only two databases when you could have at your disposal evidence across a wide range of databases and geographies and what have you? Why would that be considered reliable enough and not require more to be more credible?
Yeah, so I think it's hard to draw the line, right? So 2 might be too few, and 25, or as OHDSI grows, 100 might become unmanageable. And it's about, I think, okay, there becomes available data that you could use in your study. That's great if it's available and easy to incorporate, but very rarely is it a small addition to add a new database. So frequently there's a high cost associated with it that shouldn't be underestimated. Mostly not a financial cost, but the person time involved in coordinating and bringing that results together. And I think just again, there's nobody stopping you running the same study again with the same code and adding it to a meta-analysis later. I think that it's somewhat reflective of the limitations in how scientific publications, how these things are approached. We're trying to do one perfect study up front, whereas what it should be is like the accumulation of knowledge over time.
Very good. Thank you, Ed and Erica. That was a very good debate. I'm going to share my screen and ask everybody in the community to vote. If you go to pollev.com/PatrickRyan800, you're going to now see that you have to get off the fence. We had 25% of you were actually not sure about this debate, but now you have a choice to make your decision. If you agree with Erica in the affirmative that our best strategy for OHDSI network studies would be to get as many databases as possible, please vote yes. Affirmative, I agree. And if you side with Ed that we'd be better off just to get enough databases to answer the question quickly, then I want you to vote no. Negative, I don't agree. I'm going to take a minute here to make sure everybody's able to cast their vote. And while that's going on, I see also there's continued conversations going on in the chat, which I encourage you all to take a look at as well. So OHDSI network study, as many databases as possible, or just enough to answer the question quickly? Give you 10 more seconds. While some software crashes on my machine.
Oh, yeah. What is that?
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Congratulations, Erica. You have won OHDSI debate number 2 with 60% of the community now supporting your affirmative position that our strategy should be to get as many databases as possible. Congratulations. I hope that when you see Ed next that you take an opportunity to rub it in his face.
No.
But even though you're probably too polite to actually do that. Very good. I want to thank Adam, JPEG, Erica, and Ed for being good sports to do these debates. I know that it's a fun format. Lots of people tell me that they really enjoy this, but I can also let you know that it's kind of stressful to be the debater. So I appreciate them taking the time to put themselves out there and providing very good cogent points. Of course, with all of this, there isn't necessarily a one right answer. I think in this specific debate, the fact that Ed has been successful in driving smaller studies to make real impact to the EMA is an important thing. And what we need to take lessons for is how do we actually do large studies with lots of databases quickly and well? And I think as a community, we can kind of drive towards that. And certainly in our open source development, I think what we need to figure out how to do is continue to expand our development so we can support both web-based interfaces and advanced analytic tools as we grow our community forward. But I want to thank everybody for participating. Thank everybody for their votes. Congratulations to JPEG and Erica on their victories. Craig, I'll turn it back to you.